Yeah, so it looks like, ladies and gentlemen, that this panel is going to be holding you between now and the first floor. So you'll have to bear with us for the next 50 minutes as we walk you through this session. Personally, for me, I think it's been a very enriching day. Great to see the kind of insights that at least I have taken away since this morning. And I do believe that it's been a very productive session for you as well. So in this session, I will try and keep myself as brief as possible and let the panelists, eminent set of panelists out here, starting from a research organization like ARAI, we have a fleet owner, a progressive fleet owner at that, a person from a company which is into emission solutions as well as powertrains. So Shailesh, as I was just mentioning, is that you did a fabulous presentation before the session. So literally he's taken the wind out of my sails and I have little to value add. But having said that, I think there's been considerable amount of talk about CNG and LNG. So let's try and, at least I'll try and keep it to as minimal as possible in terms of overlap, and I'll let the speakers do most of the talking, so to speak. So I think it's very important to understand that from a perspective of one is the COP26, the commitment that we have made to keeping the emission levels low, and second is from an energy security perspective. I think India is moving towards a gasification of its energy mix. So as I understand from some statistics that 6.7% of the energy that we are using today comes from gaseous fuels as of now. The objective is to take it to a level of about 15% by 2030, so which means it's not too far away from the future. And the real good news obviously is the fact that we've seen CNG really pick up in a very, very big way. I understand it's a kind of a controlled commodity price, so with the arbitrage between diesel and CNG, so CNG has been clipping at a very rapid pace, not just in cars, but also in commercial vehicles. So we will talk about that a little further. And of course, the one that is going to be exciting in the future for us is LNG. And Shailesh did mention about in his presentation how Cummins has kind of made the engine less complex by saying that most of the parts below the cylinder head is more or less common to that of the diesel engines. So I think that's a master stroke which I think Cummins has done, and it helps the entire ecosystem to move in a very, very good way in terms of keeping it simple as well as, of course, very profitable also, I guess, for Cummins. So that's what it is. So let me dive into the question. So the way at least I have kind of, along with the panelists, taken them into confidence that we will try and have 2 rounds of questions to each of the panelists. And I will start with Dr. Tipse to begin with. So Dr. Tipse, you're aware of the fact that we are now moving into this gasified structure of products and service, products and the shift that we're talking about. So how do you see the OEMs configuring their powertrains as well as submitting their prototypes for testing these new vehicles, so to speak, and how is ARAI setting up the regulatory framework to take care of this new fuel types, which are like chalk and cheese with respect to diesel?
Yeah, so I say that we are seeing a lot of change in the powertrain scenario. People are now trying to move away from the for traditional fossil fuels, diesel and gasoline. Of course, they too will remain. But I see natural gas, as you rightly said, being penetrating in many segments. So as far as the regulatory agency, since I come from the regulatory sphere, the challenge for us is to have facilities for type approval, certification of all kinds of powertrains. So first challenge which we have to do is we have to upgrade our facilities. We also have to ensure that the rules are up to date. So what we are doing now is we are constantly upgrading the rules in terms of introducing new regulations for the new technologies. So I can cite recent examples where all the new fuels were notified, first of all, in gazetary regulations, then they come into CVF. Parallelly, we work with BIS to make the national standards for components for even other systems, and we also ensure that the facilities are up to date. So today we can certify almost all kinds of vehicles, maybe biofuel vehicles, gaseous fuel vehicles, even hydrogen. So all the facilities are being set up, and most of them are compliant to BS6 and above. So as far as the ARI is concerned, we are fully ready as far as certification is concerned. Coming to your first question was, I think, related to the progression of natural gas and those kind of technologies. So I see that there is definitely a move towards low carbon fuels, and definitely, as Mr. Shailesh gave in his presentation, that definitely more and more OEMs are developing low carbon solutions. So in that, natural gas plays a major role because it's a low hanging fruit as far as I am concerned, because it is very well developed technology, and the share of natural gas is increasing in all OEMs. Many OEMs are developing new products, and there are also considerable interest on biofuels, and also in terms of hydrogen as an ultimate fuel. But hydrogen, again, there are certain challenges as far as the overall availability and safety and cost is concerned of the fuel. Barring that, over a period of time, I think with increased use, the cost will come down. But as of now, natural gas seems to be a very promising front runner as far as the ultimate fuel scenario is concerned. These are my thoughts on that.
Thank you. Ramratan Singhji, you are a living exponent of how you research and how you got into the transportation segment. I think we would like to hear your views in terms of how do you see the progress of LNG in particular, because you are predominantly into the long haul segment, so to speak. How do you see this? Is it going to be a challenge? Is it going to be disrupting your business? How do you see this going forward?
Good evening, Shyam. Thank you for your question. First of all, good evening to everyone here. And we know we are between your cocktail and this session, last session, so you're going to hate us for that if we give it longer. But basically, for LNG, I'd like to just narrate my 2 years of research that I was doing to kind of start somewhere about introduction of LNG as a fuel for long haul trucking. And this story started somewhere in 2019, and we were doing some research on the problem for any fleet operator is that diesel is a major component of your fuel cost, and most of the time we are always struggling on the operating cost because of the diesel, because it's a significant component. And then apart from that, of course, is the second challenge is the level of pollution that supposedly diesel creates. Particularly, I'm talking about 2019 when it was a PS4 era of trucks. So we were looking at LNG, and then we were looking at actually 2-3 options of what can be done in long haul trucking, right? Like what are the other options other than diesel? And when we looked at global experiences, so we could figure it out that the choices are very limited. Like electric trucks, yes, it is very fancy. It sounds the whole thing sounds very good from the zero emission perspective. But the problem is that right now there are not many truck manufacturers who are making those kind of trucks. There are few even in the developed world. Then comes the second. Then you had two choices basically. You had CNG and LNG. Now CNG, if you look at the CNG as a fuel, there are obvious problems with CNG in the long haul. One of that is the range that you can get with a particular set of CNG tank. The second obviously is the refueling time. So if you take a longer refueling time compared to diesel, you lose time in your trucking operations. And also because if you want to increase the range, then you have to increase the number of tanks. Then you reduce the cargo that you can carry. So it's a very difficult situation. So therefore CNG again was rolled out from the mix of fuels that could be used for long haul. When I say long haul, I mean anything that is at least 800 to 1000 kilometers and above. So anything below that is a different category. Finally, it turned out that LNG, the research showed that in Europe there was a lot of work done by some of the OEMs in LNG, Iveco in particular, also some other major fleet truck companies, truck manufacturing companies. So they had introduced LNG, and in Europe, in particularly in Germany and some other countries, there were also incentives. If you are an LNG truck operator, like so you have you don't pay tolls, for example, or you have some other tax advantages. So there were tax breaks also because LNG is viewed cleaner fuel compared to diesel. Then I was in China to study the same subject. So when I did my research, I came across that China is another country where you will see a significant number of trucks, particularly in the port areas, being driven by LNG fuel. And so I went to Shenzhen and I was wanting to see the LNG fuel stations. I was wanting to see an LNG truck. I went to a dealership which was also selling LNG trucks, and I went to port areas where the LNG trucks were being operated. So interacting with all of these guys, and the one thing that I did during that time was that I used the Google Translate a lot, because all of these guys were Chinese speaking with very broken or no English, and I had to do my research. So I would type everything in Google Translate, and then it would be seen by them, and then they would respond. So it was a useful tool, just as an example. But what came out from that was that yes, LNG is a good fuel as an alternative to diesel, because in terms of refueling time, it is nearly same as diesel. In terms of the cleaner, capabilities compared to diesel, it is surely a better fuel. But then it does, even in China, with such a developed LNG fuel economy, it restricts your truck movements to certain geography where there are LNG filling stations available. And they've been doing this for more than 10 years now, so they have at least some infrastructure in place. But at the end of the day, when I was talking to them about operating cost, it turned out that in terms of fuel efficiency for a truck to truck, like with the same truck with diesel and the same truck with LNG, nearly same. Like if I'm saying 55 ton GVW truck, suppose we say fuel efficiency of diesel is 3 kmpm, nearly the same you can get from LNG for the same configuration. But the LNG price in China, at the fuel station level I'm talking, the LNG fuel price was about 25% cheaper. So that could be because of government's support, that could also be because of market support. So when you look at pros and cons of LNG as a long haul fuel, so the pros that I can tell you, you get long range, it's a cleaner fuel, it's also like nobody can do any LNG theft of the fuel. Okay, these are the pros. On the cons side, there are 3 to 4 things which I learned also in China, but also from other research. That one of the things about LNG is that if your truck is standing in certain geography for a longer time, like it's not being operated for any reason, maybe due to lack of load, or maybe there's a detention where your truck has gone and cannot be unloaded for various factors, every single day you have to build in between 2 to 3% of boil off. Boil off is like the fuel just goes out of the tank, just it's a natural process. And in a hot and humid country like India, where this has not yet been tested, that could be a significant problem. If you have to stand, let's say, for 4 or 5 days, you are losing 10% of your fuel without doing anything. So you got 10% benefit in the cost, but you lost it almost like, just because of the problem of operations. So this is one thing that we have to keep in mind when we talk of LNG trucking. And another area of concern in LNG trucking is, of course, the lack of infrastructure in India as we speak. So from 2016 onwards, we have seen some form of, or the other, push from the government to try and build LNG infrastructure. Unfortunately, as we speak till today, there are just a couple of LNG fuel station pumps in India, and it still remains a very long journey when it comes to the filling infrastructure. And because of this, even if tomorrow the infrastructure comes in, you will still be kind of limited in the operating of this truck in a certain geography. You have to be very sure about the availability of enough business, in particular those geographies, for an LNG fuel truck. And to top it finally, I just want to make my closing comment on one of the factors which actually also put me off the track of LNG trucking, like I just dropped the whole project, simply because what happened in last 12 months is, so if you look at diesel as a fuel, it's quite regulated by the government in a way that all your peaks and drops in the diesel prices globally, they don't get passed on to us as a free operator, because government either reduces the tax or increases the tax depending on the situation. But basically it regulates the fuel to make sure, because it's a common man's fuel, so there is some kind of control, price control. Unfortunately, in LNG there is nothing like that. In LNG you are completely market driven fuel pricing, and what has happened in LNG in the last 12 months will knock off any plans of investment, at least in the near future, because what was $5 per MMBTU or whatever is the metric, at one point in time it went up to $30 per MMBTU. Suppose by any chance we had invested in an LNG truck, and if 6 times the fuel cost has jumped, those trucks would be idling now. So there are risks that one has to understand, and as a fleet operator of certain medium or size, there is only so much you can take unless there is a forward market in where you can lock in your LNG prices. That will be one thing that we have to look at. Another, there is nobody from government here, but if the message goes to the government, LNG should be immediately included in GST as a fuel. I mean, this is one thing that can push a lot of medium and large fleet operators to move towards LNG. So these are the things, these are my initial thoughts on LNG trucking.
Thank you for that perspective, sir. So let me come to Shailesh. Shailesh, I think you mentioned quite a lot of things in the absolutely insightful presentation. So I have 2 questions for you. So is the B6.7 that the one which is going to come into India very shortly, say with your OEM partner? Point number 1. Point number 2 is that we've also been hearing for the last year or so that by virtue of the arbitrage in the prices between diesel and LNG, and I think LNG is available in some parts, like Nagpur was probably the first city to have it for obvious reasons, so we don't have to get into that, but if the arbitrage is there from the extent of maybe 10% to 25%, do you also see, and we've heard of these instances where some STUs wanted to do a conversion of their diesel to LNG? And second is, even the quarry or mining owners who wanted to do that, and there was some promise from the gas companies that they will be delivering this LNG to their doorsteps. So if you're in a small radius, then of course you don't need to be too worried about where the fuel station is. The last part is, of course, and this is in the public domain, that about approximately 1,000 LNG stations are going to be set up over the next 2-3 years, and predominantly on the Golden Quadrilateral, and that makes great sense because most of these trucks and buses are going to run on the GQ, so to speak. So how is it that Cummins is anchoring this particular way, this particular thing in a good way, so that the product introduction and the acceptance goes hand in hand?
Thank you, Mr. Mallar. So I think the first key important success factor, beyond what Mr. Sankey spoke about for LNG, and I spoke briefly about it in my presentation, is to provide transparent performance, this diesel-like performance. Because so far in the last 2 decades, what we have done is looked at CNG as an alternate fuel. And we also started with the mandated markets, STUs and bus operators at mandated cities. So they didn't have any choice but to go ahead with that kind of fuel, even if it was under-delivering on the power, torque, and the duty cycle did not bring that as a big challenge because it was city buses, you could still live, you always, had 19 ton as the maximum GVW, so you could still live with the engine, CNG engine, which would be 30% lower than power and torque compared to diesel. I think OEMs have understood that we cannot have that kind of strategy replicated in LNG. And that's taking time, that's a new development, and I can tell you one engine platform development from scratch actually takes to around 300 crores. So it's a big commitment, and it's always a chicken and egg story that, where is the infrastructure, how do I invest 300 crores? But I believe here I have to give credit to government that, despite having no visibility of a LNG vehicle, LNG truck, they're still going and committed to, putting up an infrastructure. There are 50 LNG stations which are already under construction. So that's a big leap of faith which government has taken with a long-term focus that yes, we need to drive that gas adoption to 15%. So I think that would be a critical performance criteria where we need to have power torque so that we drive adoption. We engineered the adoption to long-haul trucks, because unless a 55-ton tractor-trailer customer is able to get a same feel of the performance, turnaround time, fuel efficiency, he's not going to share because he's comparing 70,000 diesel fuel stations versus even 1,000, his preference is still going to be diesel, unless there is a strong pull in terms of total cost of ownership, which is derived from the delta on the fuel efficiency and the fuel cost, and secondly, certainly the overall performance. So keeping this in mind, we have been working with MOPNG, in the gas mobility business, so that we convey that, what are the areas where we need to focus on infrastructure. In fact, we have jointly made a blueprint of where do we have to put the LNG infrastructure and what should the proximity. Eventually, we selected, all national highways, golden quadrilateral, and made a blueprint that every 100 kilometers on the golden quadrilateral and every 200 kilometers on the rest of the highways, we need to have LNG fuel station. So that's a roadmap we have been collaborating with, and that's how I think it would be a success factor. To the fuel cost, which Mr. Sanghi mentioned, I think yes, there is, it's important that we have a differential of at least 20 to 25 rupees between diesel and LNG. But it's all about the mechanism of pricing, which the way we do for fuels in India. It's not that we have totally uncontrolled fuel pricing for LNG, CNG, because if Mr. Sanghi says that there's a 6-time increase, we have not seen a 6-time increase in the CNG price. So there is some control, but certainly what challenge we have there is that the kind of revisions we have on the diesel price every 15 days, that's not there in the CNG or LNG. We follow 6 monthly cycle, which is a lag of 6 months with the global prices. So if you go and back, look at the 6-month-old gas prices globally, you will see a peak shootout. And now there is cooled off, but we will not see impact unless we move on to September, because that's the second cycle we'll start adopting, the new fuel prices. Another key challenge why we don't see similar kind of fluctuations is because our taxes are not as a proportion or a percentage of the base fuel price. It's actually a value always. It's 35 rupees on a diesel, 50 rupees on a petrol. So it's not a percentage which is there. So that's where, government gets to play. That keeping the amount same, even with the base price of the fuel increases, it still is a very small contribution to the total price of the overall retail price. So I think those are the areas where we are advocating that the government that we need to have some kind of delta price between LNG and diesel, so that you could drive adoption and other advantages and collaboration which we are doing with government is also the PLI scheme. You will see a lot of components on the gas, on the LNG, on the cryogenic tanks are part of PLI scheme. So the kind of acquisition cost which we see right now, you will see that changing, because PLI is starting from April 2022, and you will start having manufacturing incentives for industries which are putting local manufacturing for the cryogenic tanks.
So quick add-on question, Shailesh, a quick reply as well, is that we know the kind of inroads that electric buses have made in the smart cities and things like that, but at the same time we know that there are almost, in the morning somebody said there are almost 32,000 STU buses which are waiting to be scrapped because they have crossed that age of 15 years and thereabouts. And given the fact that the STUs are cash strapped, though the GCC model is in place, which is working wonderfully well for them, there would certainly be a lot of STUs which would probably like to look at CNG as an option. So how do you see this play in the short to medium term in STUs adopting CNG, because it's a more familiar fuel, the infrastructure is there in the depots, and there is still an arbitrage in the cost between that of diesel and CNG. A quick response, please.
So you're referring to city buses on the STU, or you're looking at long distance?
City buses, yes.
I think city buses, we see most of the transition with the new vehicles would be on electric. What has happened is, with the large scale tenders which CSS is driving, they're able to get the acquisition cost to a great level,
Even better than CNG?
It would not be better than CNG, but certainly, they're expecting that with the grand tender which they're looking at for 50,000, it could be a solution where they could bring a lot of substantial cost savings. Another thing is that, I think there the ecosystem, PLI, everything is working together, whether it's a battery or even the fuel systems or even the ECMs for that matter for gas are part of the PLI scheme. So I think everything is falling in place for STOs to actually look at very aggressively on the EV buses and not look at CNG, right now. So that's my conviction that I think they have passed that hurdle of acquisition cost. And STOs, they're not the profit centers. They're actually service centers for they're service organizations for the government. So I've been talking to a lot of STOs.
Very sad.
They're never profit focused actually. Their entire focus is public service. So I don't think GCC model has certainly helped them, but acquisition cost is not being critically seen by STUs.
Right, sad situation, but yes, I think we need to move on. Sainath, the question to you, I think much has been already discussed. How do you see as a tier 1 supplier, the LNG versus diesel, how do you see the performance play between the two in terms of, will they deliver identical performances or are there going to be any gaps? While in Shailesh's presentation we found that, it is very transparent and he's saying that we can deliver the torque and stuff like that. So how do you view it as a tier 1 supplier in terms of how do you see the play between LNG and diesel?
Good evening, everybody. I represent Go1. Thing is, we are doing a lot of research work on the commercial vehicle front. If you consider LNG and diesel performances, how they behave, that is a question for me. So it is definitely this LNG, when it is in the liquid form, it has got a high energy density. Finally, it converts to the gaseous form for at some pressure like 6 to 8 bar or even like that. So when it comes to the CNG, there is a BSFC is the performance level where we can see this BSFC is always lower when compared to diesel. That means almost 10 to 15% of the fuel economy we can gain for the same power output. So this is the first observation we have done. Then thing is, again when CNG, definitely there is a torque drop would be there when compared to the diesel engines. So this can be compensated by the turbocharging for the same engine with the LNG kit. And also the CNG direct injection we are trying. That means similar to diesel injection. This injection into the cylinder head, that's what I mean to say. So these kind of injectors also are in place. That means it is in the prototype stage, it is not in the production level. Once it comes up as a production point, what happens is like 30% of the volumetric efficiency can be improved through the speed range. So what I mean to say is the earlier when it is in the port fuel made CNG injections, we will have 30% reduction. If you put direct injection of CNG injectors, we will have 30% higher. So this kind of strategies are there. Still it is under research only at our place. But on the other hand, we have already developed this H2 injectors with low fuel rate and high fuel rate, which can cater services for light duty and high duty applications. In that we saw when we converted the GDI engine to H2 based engine, we reached 80% of the torque development. So that has been is ongoing to reach 100%. Similar way, the CNG also in future we may take it, but it is in the process of discussions. So I think.
Yeah, thank you, Sainath. So I go back to Dr. Tipse. So Dr. Tipse here is at the cutting edge of both regulation and the emission certification and all of that stuff. Let's switch gears to hydrogen. Could you just throw some light in terms of, because in the I think it was the last budget or something like that, there was this formation of this Indian Hydrogen Alliance, which is actually where the private sector is working very closely with the PSU oil giants. So could you throw some light in terms of when do you see this play out of hydrogen coming into the Indian CV sector? Though of course globally I think a lot of MNCs have made their transition map. It looks closer to maybe 20, 30, 40s. I'm talking about the European multinationals. But how do you see that play happening, and where do we stand?
Okay, as far as hydrogen is concerned, I'll first start with the rules. That we already have all the rules in place. Hydrogen is notified as automotive fuel. The component standards are also mostly in place. So today, if somebody brings a hydrogen vehicle, we can certify it. That is the bottom line. As far as the question regarding the fuel itself, there are some issues with hydrogen related to safety. So there are some special safety devices required on the vehicle, which other fuels do not require. So those kind of things have to be developed. And considering the safety scenario in our field, we really have to be careful when we introduce that fuel in India, because there's a lot of mishappenings in the field, because people tend to do jugaad and so many things. So we really need safety is very important. There should not be any cutting corners on that. Now, as far as the Indian Hydrogen Alliance, one good thing has happened, that the National Green Hydrogen Mission has been announced by the Prime Minister, and they are really focusing very much on the hydrogen as a future fuel. Again, PLI scheme also, there is a lot of components which are related to hydrogen, particularly fuel cell. And also a lot of discussion on the hydrogen IC engine now. Many OEMs have started working on it. So I see that within a few years, we really will see some hydrogen engines. But point is, still as far as the main hurdle is the cost. Because if we see hydrogen by electrolysis route, today I think the cost is around $6 per kg. I may be wrong, but that is the ballpark figure. And the target is to come to $1 per kg.
Famous Mr. Mukesh Ambani statement of 111, right?
111, yes. Then it is viable, because in India it's a very cost-conscious segment. So typically a gas fuel, people would like to equate it to CNG. Maybe they might pay slightly higher than CNG. So that comes to around $1 a kg roughly. So if that is a challenge, if that is achieved, then yes, definitely it is a game changer. As far as pollution and all is concerned, definitely it has no carbon, so it is very clean. Only water is the exhaust, NOx might be there. And all the technology-wise, already people are working on it, so technology is not a concern. So I see that there are three hurdles. One is the safety, second is the cost, and third is the infrastructure. But now, fortunately, the players like Reliance are getting into it. So as you mentioned, the Indian Hydrogen Alliance. So they work in a very big scale. They have a lot of plans. They are also wanting to produce hydrogen in a very big way. Maybe also go for retrofitment of existing vehicles to hydrogen, which is another area which they want to get into. So they have many plans, but I hope that with this all aggressive way of working, hopefully in a few years down the line, we will see that hydrogen will really reach a commercialization stage. As far as infrastructure, government support is already there. The government support for introduction. Infrastructure will take its own slow time. That is the case with CNG and LNG also. We saw that last 20 years we are struggling for the stations. And there also there are many regulatory hurdles and the space requirements and so many things are there. But if we are committed, yes, we can go that route. Hydrogen is a very good fuel for the future as far as the cleanliness of it is concerned. And if we work on these 2-3 hurdles, I think it's a possibility that we can get.
Great. Thank you. For the benefit of the audience, 111 was a challenge which Mr. Mukesh Ambani gave to his team last year. One was basically in 10 years' time, starting 2020, he would want to have 1 kg of hydrogen being produced at $1. So that's basically what it is. So that's something which I hope we will all look forward to. I move now very quickly, and I see the hostess on the stage. So are we running short of time, ma'am? Yes, so I think we'll try and wind it up as quickly as possible. Ramrathan Singh ji, you are basically a fleet operator. Now you see these new age fuels coming in. What are the biggest challenges that you will foresee from the ecosystem? From as an operator, of course, you have your own set of things which you just mentioned about in your earlier this one. How do you see the other things like the maintenance cost? You spoke about the refueling time, the driver skill sets. Yeah, one of the big takeaway for me is that you said that you can't pilfer fuel. I think that's one of the biggest advantages that I think India will get if we shift to gaseous fuels, right? So could you just give your thoughts and try to be as brief as possible?
So in a minute I'll just try to conclude on the driver part because the other parts I covered in my first interaction. Basically, there is a lot of misconception about this driver diesel pilferage in India. As a fleet operator, let me clarify it. Driver doesn't do any pilferage without the knowledge of the fleet operator. So we know internally. We have a calculation for it. So when you give a fleet to a driver, or the truck to the driver, for point A to point B you fix a certain diesel, you already know that he has to drive at a fuel in the most fuel efficient way, which is his skill, and he needs to be rewarded for that skill. So there is always a certain diesel left to him to take, right? It's part of his package. Let's call it an incentive to drive efficiently. So it's not a pilferage in the real sense of the term. Second thing, most of the pilferage, if we want to control today with diesel also, there's enough technology available in the market with the fuel sensors which can give you a fuel alert of the fuel theft directly on your mobile or on your IT systems. So absolutely in our fleet today we have zero driver pilferage. Whatever is left to the driver to earn, so it's part of his package. So I don't see that as a major challenge. Suppose if we shift to LNG tomorrow, and of course that fuel will not be taken by driver, we will have to recalibrate his package in such a way that whatever he was earning earlier from saving the diesel, now he has to be paid directly in the cash component. So from that perspective, there is not much of a difference. And that's what I think I would like to conclude here.
Thank you. Sainath, let me come to you. We've been always talking about the fact that CNG is gaining a lot of traction. Now, if you were to slightly switch gears and look at how does the last mile, particularly the small commercial vehicles, how do you see this trade-off between a BEV, which is what is currently the flavor of these operators, including the e-commerce players, vis-a-vis CNG, and how do you see this challenge being resolved, or rather addressed by, let's say, BorgWarner?
So if you consider that e-com players, first of all, we have to segment-wise, we need to understand what are their particular requirements, like auto segment, then Tata Ace segment, lower commercial vehicle, and then higher commercial vehicles. If you consider all these things in segment and analyze it properly, this CNG will fit in this lower commercial vehicle basic thing. And in higher commercial basic thing, we can see LNG and H2 conversions. So at lower, like the auto and that kind of stuff, if you take e-com, mostly these are directly converting to the electrifications maximum. Very few are CNG bus. So I think that is
okay. Shailesh, the last question to you actually is that could you just give your thoughts in terms of when do you see hydrogen being brought in by Cummins, and how is Cummins working, let's say, with the India Hydrogen Alliance in terms of taking this forward?
So the hydrogen, I'll divide into two parts. One is hydrogen generation and hydrogen consumption. Hydrogen generation we'll see pretty soon coming up. I think that's a need of the hour because even today we have substantial consumption of hydrogen, not in the automotive sector but industrial applications. Refineries, steel production, cement production use substantial hydrogen, and if we need to really look at the end-to-end decarbonization, we need to decarbonize those industrial applications first, which have huge consumption of current fossil fuel-based fuels. So that's something which is coming up. You'll see a lot of investments coming up on electrolyzers, and to the kind of targets which big industrial houses are making in terms of $1, in next 8 to 10 years. So I think on the production side, green hydrogen, I'm quite assured, and in terms of ecosystem and in terms of renewable energy, I think it's complementing in a right way, so that we are successful with that big number of $1. On the consumption part, I think we'll still, there are two parts again. If you're looking at hydrogen internal combustion engines, and second part would be hydrogen fuel cells. Hydrogen fuel cells are still need a good amount of time to develop, localize, and come to a kind of a price parity where it would drive adoption. You will see good amount of adoption in pilot projects in next 5 to 7 years before you look at adoption, real adoption. I can just give an example. The recent, the first hydrogen bus which would be coming up in very soon in India, and the numbers are in public domain. The tender price for that hydrogen bus is 10 times that of the diesel bus. So you can imagine how much time it will take. And currently it's completely subsidized, going with the right with the government projects. But that's certainly not going to happen with a with a fleet owner or the end customer. So we'll see that technology maturity. We don't have localization. We still are trying to build high pressure fuel cells in India. We do not have the rare elements also. So I expect a lot of time. PLI is a big initiative where most of the components are covered. So on the fuel cell side, I see maybe hydrogen consumption could take good amount of time, maybe a decade or so in a large scale. If you are able to pitch hydrogen ICE successfully in the eyes of the legislation and convince them to have a bare minimum infrastructure, the way we are looking at for LNG, I think that could be a re-adoption, and as soon as maybe 2 to 3 years, we could see a re-adoption and consumption of hydrogen on the hydrogen internal combustion engines.
So the immediate deal breaker for, let's say, fuel cell, as you mentioned, is that the level of purity that you require of hydrogen for a fuel cell is much, much more than that of a hydrogen ICE, and therefore I think there's no brainer to see as to which one will become more realistic. So gentlemen, thank you so much for the last insights over the last 40 minutes. So I'll just throw open this session to the audience. Maybe we can take about 2 or 3 questions, man. Yeah. You could introduce yourself and also say to which person that you're directing the question to.
Sure. I'm Ramesh from Odin Thermal Systems, Chennai. Like going from the diesel to the alternate fuels like the CNG and the H2, you are keeping the engine 80% common across these platforms. So I am a Taiwan producer for the heat exchangers, radiators. So will my radiator is going to be same for this different fuels, or we are going to see a higher heat rejection?
So compared to diesel, certainly on the LNG, we will see good amount of higher heat rejection because of the technology and the combustion which we are looking at. I'll have to get back because I'm not privy to share much on the hydrogen ICE right now, and I expect to be in the lines of LNG because it's primarily on the SI technology. But we are also ensuring that it doesn't become a bottleneck, that you start re-engineering the vehicle level, because if that happens, that defeats the purpose on the drop-in for a long haul. The idea is to keep the rest of the outer boundaries of the vehicle intact, so that even if a cooling system is increased in terms of size, you do not have to re-engineer the vehicle and defeat the purpose of drop-in hydrogen ICE. So that's what we are looking at, ensuring that we have flexibility on different powertrains to be used on the same vehicle, and which we're right now doing with our OEM partners.
Thank you.
Before we can actually go for another Q&A, I would like to make an important announcement. I request all of you to please fill up the feedback forms simultaneously. And again, after the completion of our panel discussion, we are going to have cocktail sessions, which is going to be happening at meeting room number 5, first floor. Thank you.
Yeah, good evening panels. It was the nice discussion and good knowledge also. Myself Mahendra from Tata Motors. We came to know that this LNG requires the minus 130 degrees centigrade to store this LNG. So, do you feel, I'm not particular about the foreign panelists, anyone can. So, is there any challenge at that dealership or the petrol pump or the one vehicle or from bullet to vehicle? So, how to maintain this LNG minus 130 at regular pace? Do you feel any challenges in LNG?
I can take that. So thank you for the question. So on the vehicle level, certainly you will have a different storage system. You will have cryogenic storage system. It's minus 160 degrees, and that was the most critical part in terms of cost so far for the LNG. And you'll be surprised that the tank itself costs equivalent to almost same cost as engine. But that's going to change because cryogenic power tank is part of the PLI scheme, and we have local manufacturing started on the cryogenic tanks. As far as transportation, I think you will again have similar kind of cryogenic tank transportation, and we have that. A lot of retail companies which are setting up this first 50 retail outlets are already gearing up for that kind of transportation, and we have been engaging with them. In fact, they are very keenly watching, when do we introduce the engine, because they have been investing, and they're looking at when they could start utilizing. So right now they're keeping the fuel stations at LCNG, where they could have flexibility of CNG as well as LNG. But as they see dedicated vehicles coming up, as the OEMs start making announcements, I think there will be a lot of conviction coming in building that rest of the value chain, end-to-end value chain on transportation. But yes, tank is one of the critical part, which would be a big differentiator, and that's only for storage. When it comes to combustion, it actually gets into the gaseous form. So the engine side, there is hardly any change when we talk about CNG or LNG.
Good evening, sir. Thanks for this knowledgeable session. I have one question to Mr. Shailesh, sir. Sir, there is no difference between CNG and LNG, just like compressed natural gas and liquid natural gas. Okay. So, same engine with 6.7 we can use as a LNG engine with the addition of extra heat exchanger and high pressure regulator, low pressure regulator. So, is it possible? Because it will save, just like you said, one development of one engine, it will cost 3,000 crores. So, with the addition of this equipment, it will save a lot of money, and existing you can give customer or OEM both the options, CNG plus LNG combination.
Sorry, I'm not able to hear your question. Yeah, so when you're looking at the difference between CNG and LNG, I think if your engine is capable of LNG, it is actually capable of CNG as well, So there is no difference. The only difference comes in when you're looking at creating a performance which is transparent to a diesel engine. I think that's where the technology comes in, storage technology, where you could be able to achieve that kind of power torque. I think that's where a good amount of investment goes into technology and development. But I don't think there is any incremental investment between if you have a LNG engine to convert to CNG. Was that your question?
Okay, probably the last question.
Yeah, hello. My question is directed to Mr. Shailesh. Myself Suman from ARI. So when you said that for hydrogen IC engines, the 80% of the compound below gasket are going to be the same. So in that case, is there any chance that the material properties also will remain the same for pipes and hoses or whatever for that matter? Or the material properties also will remain the same for all the components for hydrogen IC?
So major components head block will be same across the different fuels. What would change is certainly about the gasket, and the calibrations would be different. Most of the engine components would be derived from LNG engine, so you will see a lot of commonality there on the LNG engine, and some commonality on the diesel engine. On the after treatment also you will be able to optimize for information. Hydrogen engine would also have after treatment, not for CO but for NOx, which is there in the atmosphere, but it would be much optimized solution compared to what we see in the current diesel or natural gas. So most of the key components, we call it critical component 5S, would be common across the platforms.
Okay, so properties will remain same, all the structural related materials. Thank you.
So thank you, ladies and gentlemen. You've been a wonderful audience, and once again, thank you, panelists. It's been fantastic insights. I'm sure the audience is equally gratified at this knowledge share. Thank you so much.